On June the 25th, 2026, Microsoft did something it did not want you to see. There was no press release. There was no announcement. There was no keynote, no blog headline, no email to the hundreds of millions of people it directly affected. Instead, someone at Microsoft quietly opened an old support page, added a single line of text they labeled an editor's note, and closed the file. That one line reversed a deadline the entire technology world had been bracing for. It gave Windows 10 a second life. And Microsoft said absolutely nothing about it. A company worth more than $3 trillion just changed the fate of the most widely used operating system in history, and it chose to do it in silence. Not because they were embarrassed by a mistake, because they were forced into a corner, and a company that has been telling you for over a year that you must upgrade or be left behind suddenly, wordlessly, admitted the opposite. For more than a year, Microsoft had been anything but quiet. There were full-screen prompts urging you to upgrade. There were warnings that your computer was reaching the end of support. There were messages, reminders, and nudges arriving on Windows 10 machines all over the world, all of them pushing in one direction, all of them saying the clock is running out. Microsoft was perfectly happy to be loud when the message was move on. But the moment the message became you can stay, the volume dropped to zero. What exactly did that one hidden line of text change? Who won? And who is Microsoft still quietly pressuring even now? And why, if this is genuinely good news for the ordinary Windows user, did the biggest software company on Earth go so far out of its way to make sure you would never hear about it? Because the reason for the silence is the whole story. And there is one number, buried inside the reason they blinked, that Microsoft would very much prefer you never repeat out loud. Here is the number. Roughly 500 million personal computers cannot upgrade to Windows 11. Not will not. Cannot. These are working machines, many of them only a few years old, that Microsoft's own hardware rules have declared ineligible. 500 million computers locked out, not by age or by failure, but by a policy decision made in an office in Redmond. That is the immovable object Microsoft's deadline finally ran into. Let that settle for a second, because it reframes everything. When Windows 10 reached its official end of support on October the 14th, 2025, the plan was simple. Push everyone toward Windows 11 or toward buying a brand new machine, and for a while, the numbers moved fast. By early 2026, independent tracking from StatCounter showed Windows 11 had climbed past 72% of all Windows desktops, while Windows 10 had fallen to around 26%. On paper, that looks like a clean victory. The migration looked almost finished, but almost is doing a tremendous amount of work in that sentence. Because 26% of the Windows world is still an enormous population of computers. The Windows family runs on well over 1 billion active devices, so a quarter of that is not a rounding error. We are talking about hundreds of millions of machines still switched on, still working, still doing exactly what their owners need. And a very large share of them belong to that locked-out group. The ones that physically cannot make the jump because they lack a specific security chip called TPM 2.0, or because their processor sits on Microsoft's approved list and simply is not on it. These people did nothing wrong. Their computers still work perfectly, and under the original plan, they were about to be cut off from security updates entirely. And notice the shape of the numbers, because it tells you the migration was never as finished as it looked. Windows 11's share climbed fast right up to the deadline, then the easy wins ran out. The people who could upgrade already had. What was left were the holdouts and the locked out, and that group did not shrink on schedule. That is the reality that turned a confident deadline into a quiet retreat. That is the wall Microsoft ran into. And what they did when they hit it tells you far more than the announcement they refused to make. Because to understand why one quiet edit mattered so much, you have to understand exactly what was supposed to happen next. And that story starts with a promise Microsoft made and then, twice now, has had to walk back. When Windows 10 launched in 2015, Microsoft called it the last version of Windows. Not a marketing slip, an actual statement of direction. The idea was that Windows would become a service, updated forever, and you would never have to buy a whole new operating system again. Millions of people believed that promise. They settled in. At its peak, Windows 10 ran on more than 80% of the world's Windows computers. It became, quietly, one of the most trusted pieces of software ever made. Then came Windows 11, and with it, a rule nobody expected. To run the new system, your computer needed that security chip, TPM 2.0, plus a modern processor from an approved list. Overnight, a huge number of perfectly capable machines were declared obsolete, not slow, not broken, just not allowed. For a company that had promised Windows 10 would be the last version you would ever need, this was a stunning reversal. And it landed hardest on exactly the people who had trusted Microsoft the most, the ones who bought a solid machine, kept it clean, and expected it to last. The key figure at the center of this is Microsoft itself, acting through the choices of its Windows leadership and the deadline they set. October the 14th, 2025. That was the day the free ride ended. After that date, no more security patches, no more technical support, no more fixes, unless you enrolled in something called Extended Security Updates. ESU for short. Think of it as a paid safety net. For businesses, that net was expensive, and it got more expensive every year, doubling annually up to a maximum of 3 years. For ordinary people, Microsoft offered a consumer version, and originally it was meant to last exactly 1 year, expiring in October 2026. 1 year. That was the original mercy, a single year of breathing room, and then the real cutoff. And Microsoft clearly expected that in that 1 year, the stragglers would give in, open their wallets, and buy new hardware. But something happened during that year that Microsoft did not plan for. And that something is what forced the quiet edit we are talking about tonight. Hold on to that, because the turning point is where this stops being a story about software and starts being a story about money and pressure. The turning point was a decision. On or around June the 25th, 2026, months before that original 1-year safety net was set to expire, Microsoft quietly extended the free consumer Extended Security Updates program by an entire additional year. The end date moved from October the 14th, 2026, all the way out to October the 12th, 2027. A full 2 years past the original death of Windows 10. Now, who made that decision and why? Microsoft did. And the official reason appeared right there in that hidden editor's note. The company wrote that the extension gives customers, in their words, more time to transition to a new Windows 11 PC while continuing to receive critical security updates. When the technology press pressed them, Microsoft added that this reflected its ongoing commitment to helping customers stay secure during the transition, and that it wanted to give people more time and flexibility to find the right PC for their needs. Read those statements carefully, because they are a masterclass in saying nothing. Notice what is missing. Nowhere does Microsoft admit that hundreds of millions of machines are locked out. Nowhere does it acknowledge that its own hardware rules created this problem. The language is all about the customer needing more time, as if the only obstacle were people being slow rather than 500 million computers being physically forbidden from upgrading. By extending the program quietly, with no announcement, Microsoft got to make a major concession without ever admitting it was a concession. If you announce a reversal loudly, you look like you got it wrong. If you slip it into a support page as an editor's note, you can help the people you cornered without ever telling the world you cornered them. That is the decision. That is the choice that reveals the whole game. But the reason they had no choice, the pressure that actually forced their hand, is bigger than any single support document. And that is where this escalates. The migration didn't just slow down, it hit a hard economic wall, and that wall is still standing today. Because telling someone their computer is obsolete is one thing. Telling them to go buy a new one, in this economy at these prices, is another thing entirely. Look at the timing. The technology press reported that the cost of PCs, tablets, and phones was expected to climb sharply through 2026, in some estimates by 10 to 20%, driven heavily by a spike in memory prices. So, picture the ordinary Windows 10 user Microsoft was leaning on. Their machine works fine. Microsoft says it is no longer allowed to run the new system. The fix is to spend hundreds of dollars on new hardware, right at the moment that hardware is getting more expensive, not less. Faced with that math, an enormous number of people did the rational thing. They stayed put. They simply refused to move. And they had help. As the deadline loomed, a whole ecosystem grew up around the holdouts. A security firm called Zero Patch, written as the number 0 followed by the word patch, publicly pledged to keep providing unofficial Windows 10 security fixes all the way through 2030. And separate from that, a growing movement began actively courting these stranded users toward a completely different path. A free one. An initiative built specifically around the idea that if Microsoft was going to abandon your working computer, there was another operating system that would happily take it in. We will come back to what that path really is, because for your situation, it may be the most important part of this entire story. Put it all together. A wall of machines that were never going to upgrade, hardware prices climbing at exactly the wrong moment, outside patchers promising to fill the gap for years, and a real, organized push pulling frustrated users toward the exits. That is the pressure that turned one quiet editor's note into a quiet retreat. Microsoft didn't extend Windows 10 out of generosity. It extended Windows 10 because the alternative was watching a wave of angry, cornered customers start looking for the door, and some of them not coming back. And that is where this stops being about statistics. Because behind every one of those numbers is a real person who trusted Microsoft and now has to decide what to do next. I want you to think about who this actually falls on, not the corporations. They have IT departments and budgets and lawyers. I mean the individual person sitting at a desk with a 5 or 6-year-old computer that does everything they need. The retiree who uses it for email and photos of the grandkids. The small business owner running the same reliable machine they have used since 2019. The person on a fixed income for whom a few $100s is not a rounding error. It is a real decision with real trade-offs. For over a year, that person has been living under a manufactured cloud of anxiety. Every few weeks, a pop-up, a warning, a message telling them their computer is no longer safe, no longer supported, no longer welcome. They did not ask for any of this. They bought a Windows machine in good faith, trusting the company that told them Windows 10 would be the last version they would ever need. And then that same company started treating their perfectly good computer like a liability, nudging them toward a purchase many of them genuinely cannot afford. Now look at the trap inside the so-called free rescue. Because yes, Microsoft says you can get this extra year of security at no cost. But read the fine print, because this is the part they are truly not telling you. To get it free, you are pushed to sync your PC settings to a Microsoft account through a feature called Windows Backup. In plain English, the free option asks you to switch on Cloud Backup and tie your machine more tightly to a Microsoft account. The other free route is to redeem 1,000 Microsoft Rewards points. The only path that asks nothing of your account habits is the one where you hand over $30. So sit with the irony that lands on that ordinary user. Many of these are exactly the people who felt betrayed by Microsoft in the first place. People who wanted less of Microsoft in their lives, not more. And the free lifeline quietly walks them deeper into the very ecosystem they were trying to step back from. It is not a scam. It is subtler than that. It is a nudge dressed as a gift, aimed at the people least equipped to notice the strings. That is the human cost of a corporate reversal delivered in silence. And it is exactly why the next part, the honest weighing of your real options, matters so much. First, the honest case for Microsoft. This extension is on its face a genuinely good thing. An extra year of free security patches for hundreds of millions of people is real protection that these users would otherwise have lost. Microsoft did not have to do this. The fact that it did, even quietly, even reluctantly, keeps a lot of vulnerable machines safe for another 12 months. And it is fair to say that maintaining an old operating system forever is not realistic. At some point, every piece of software reaches the end of its life. That is normal. But now the honest case against, and you need to hear it clearly. This is not a rescue. It is a delay. Microsoft itself frames ESU as a bridge, not a destination. And you must be precise about what this extension actually gives you, because the marketing blurs it. It provides critical and important security updates only, nothing else. No new features, no bug fixes beyond security, no product improvements, no technical support if something breaks. Your Windows 10 machine is not being cared for. It is being kept on life support, patched just enough to stay standing, while everyone waits for the plug to be pulled in October 2027. And do not fall for the softer version of this story either. Windows 10 is not saved. It is not supported again. It remains officially an end-of-life product receiving emergency patches on a countdown clock. There is no signal from Microsoft that another extension is coming after 2027. The smart way to read this is not as a reprieve. It is as a runway, a defined, limited stretch of runway that Microsoft has handed you, and the only real question is what you do with it before it runs out. That is the balanced truth. It is good news and a warning at the same time. And that tension points directly to the one opportunity hiding inside all of this. The window Microsoft just accidentally handed you. Here is what that quiet editor's note really gave you. One clean, unpressured year to make a decision on your own terms instead of Microsoft's. For over a year, the countdown clock has been doing its job, pushing people into hurried choices out of fear. That pressure is now gone until late 2027. And that changes the entire calculation because for the first time, you are not cornered. You do not have to rush out and buy a machine you cannot afford in a market where hardware prices are climbing. You do not have to surrender to Windows 11 if your gut has been telling you no. What you have, instead, is the one thing you have not had this whole time. Room to think. And remember that other path I mentioned, the free one. The movement that has been quietly courting these stranded Windows 10 users? This year is exactly when you get to look at it without a gun to your head. This is the window to sit down, calmly, and actually explore Linux as a serious alternative, not because you are forced to, because for once, you finally have the time to do it right, which is precisely where we are going next. In the next video, I am going to walk you through what it actually looks like to move from Windows to Linux as an ordinary person. Not a programmer, not a hardcore technical user, just someone with a working computer and a healthy distrust of being pushed around. Which version of Linux fits people coming from Windows 10? What you keep, what you give up, and whether your specific machine is a good candidate. If tonight was about understanding why Microsoft blinked, the next one is about what you do with the year that silence just bought you. Going back to where we started, a $3 trillion company standing at a support page, typing one quiet line it prayed you would never notice. It went silent because the truth was inconvenient. You do not have to. If you want to spend the next year taking back control of your own computer instead of waiting for the next countdown clock, subscribe and come with me into that next video. Microsoft gave you this year by accident. Let's not waste it.